Not everyone is weak because they lack strength. Many people collapse simply because they stand still for too long in front of a small stair every morning. How many times have you placed your foot on the first step, only to pull it back in silence? How many times have you promised yourself you would begin, then chosen to wait for the right moment? And what if the problem was never a lack of motivation, but that you never learned how to remove the thing that makes you hesitate? There was a person who lived this way, hundreds of years ago, not through strength, not through inspiration, but by leaving no escape route for hesitation. If you think discipline means forcing yourself forward, perhaps you misunderstood it from the very first step. He did not live in poverty, nor was he pushed to the edge. Every morning he woke up on time, the alarm went off, the room remained quiet. There was no crisis forcing him to change. But right outside the bedroom door, there was a small step, just one step, not high, not difficult, and he often stood there longer than necessary. From the outside, others would see a stable life, a steady job, a family without turmoil, a routine sufficient to get by. But there were days when, after everything was done, he sat in silence longer than usual, not doing anything more, not leaving either, just staying there, as if counting the steps he had not taken for many years. He once believed that discipline was something that appeared only when life became convenient enough, that he just needed to wait a little longer, wait until he was less tired, less overwhelmed, until a clearer signal appeared. And so every morning he repeated the same familiar motion: wake up, hesitate, step halfway down the stair, then turn back. No one blamed him, no one pushed him, no one demanded that he become a different version of himself. But that was exactly what caused everything to slowly slip away, because there was no one standing there to remind him that each time a step was pulled back in silence, that day also took away a very small part of who he was. And he began to realize that the problem was not that he didn't know what to do. The problem was that he had grown far too accustomed to not doing it. Everything did not collapse in a single day. It happened more slowly, more quietly, like a house that still stands even as countless small footsteps gradually wear away its foundation. One morning, he stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, not to look at his face, but to observe something harder to name. A gaze that was no longer rushed, yet no longer decisive at work. Meetings ended and he remained seated. He didn't speak, he didn't stand up, he just watched others rise and walk away ahead of him. Invisible staircases appeared everywhere, and he was always the one arriving last. There were moments when he meant to stand, moments when his hand was already on the table, but then he stopped, as if waiting for permission. The room was completely silent. No one was looking at him. That very silence made the decision heavier. The crisis did not arrive with an explosion. It arrived in very small moments. An email read 3 times before daring to reply. A conversation that needed to happen, postponed until tomorrow. A decision delayed until it was no longer his decision at all. The peak came on an entirely ordinary day. No storm, no rain, no external disruption. In the middle of a meeting, when all eyes turned toward him, he stood still. He did not move forward. He did not step back. He simply stood there in the middle of the room, in the middle of steps waiting to be taken. Time stretched for a few extra seconds. Those seconds were enough for him to realize something cold and unmistakable. He did not lack ability. He lacked the force to step onto the first stair. The meeting continued. Someone else spoke in his place. Everything was resolved. But when he returned home, he did not turn on the light. He sat in silence for a long time. For the first time, he did not search for reasons, did not blame circumstances, did not reassure himself that everything is still fine, because there are moments when you know exactly what you are losing even when no one else can see it. And the next morning, standing before the familiar step, he did not step down. He did not return to bed either. He stood still, not out of fear, but because for the first time he understood this. If he kept pulling this step back, there would soon be nothing left to pull back from. The turning point did not arrive like a call to action. It didn't knock on the door. It didn't urge him forward. It appeared on a very early morning when the city had not yet fully awakened. He stood there, between 2 familiar spaces. Behind him, the bed still warm with sleep. Ahead of him, the step that waited for him every day. There was no background music, no words of encouragement, only silence, the same silence he used to rely on to delay, now holding him still for longer than usual. In that moment, a quiet thought drifted through his mind. Not I must change. Not I need to be stronger. Just this: if I continue to allow myself an escape route, I will always end up back here. He realized he had been trying in a very familiar way. Trying when conditions were right. Trying when his mood was good. Trying when someone was watching, but he had never tried a different approach, removing the option of not acting. No grand goals. No distant visions. Just one small decision, small enough that it required no courage. He stepped down onto the stair. Not fast, not slow. A single step, placed in silence. There was no feeling of victory. Only the end of a negotiation that had lasted for years. From that day on, he stopped asking himself whether he wanted to or not. He asked a different question. What needs to be removed today? Remove waiting. Remove ideal conditions. remove the feeling of needing to be ready. He chose an action simple enough that excuses could not survive. No tools required, no special space, no witnesses needed. Each morning he repeated the same sequence. Wake up, stand before the step, place his foot down. Not to become someone else, but to avoid returning to the person he used to be. And from there something quiet happened. Discipline was no longer a battle. It became the absence of hesitation. On the first day, the alarm rang while the sky was still dark. Not a harsh sound, just loud enough to cut through an unfinished sleep. He didn't spring up. He lay still, listening to the silence after the alarm. That silence was always where every negotiation began. I could sleep a little longer, just 5 minutes. No one would know. No one needs to know. Then he remembered the step outside the bedroom door. It wasn't higher than yesterday. It simply appeared earlier today, in the shadow of a morning not yet formed. He sat up, not rushed, not tense, just cutting off an old reflex. His feet touched the floor, cold. That sensation usually sent him back to bed. Today, he stood still for a few seconds longer, not moving forward, not retreating, just letting the feeling pass. He stepped down, one step, not a step of determination, but a step of acceptance. Accepting that his body wasn't awake yet, accepting that his mind was still heavy, and accepting that every excuse would arrive on time if he allowed it. Outside, the city was still asleep. No encouraging lights, no sounds of approval, only silence, thick enough to make every movement clearer. He began with actions that gave no sense of progress, no measuring, no comparison, just repetition. Some mornings he stood before the step longer than usual. Some steps felt so heavy they seemed impossible to lift. But the only difference was this: he did not turn back. The first victory wasn't about how much he accomplished. It was about not leaving the position he had chosen. No retreat, no postponing it to another day. When the sun began to touch the edge of the window, he had already been there for a while. Not more tired, not stronger either, just he had crossed the step he had avoided for years. And in the silence of that morning, a small foundation was laid. No one saw it. But from that point on, every step had somewhere to stand. Nothing new happened on the third day. The fifth day was the same, and by the second week everything began to look identical. The alarm, a morning not yet fully awake, the room still holding yesterday's air, the step still there, boots unchanged. It was this repetition that became the real test. There was no longer a feeling of beginning, no excitement of a first time, only familiar footsteps moving through the same space, at the same hour, inside the same stretched silence. Some days he finished everything faster than usual. Other days, every movement felt slowed, as if pulled backward. He didn't record it, didn't mark it, didn't ask whether it was worth it. Monotony began asking questions in his place. Why continue when there is no clear progress? Why keep the rhythm when no one notices? And why repeat an action that offers no sense of victory? One morning, in a light rain, he stood before the step longer than usual, not because he was tired, but because his mind was searching for variation, a small change to feel like he was still moving forward. But he didn't step back, and he didn't move faster. He placed his foot down in the same spot, with the same rhythm, inside the same silence. That was the moment he understood. Monotony does not make a person weak. It only strips away the parts that need constant stimulation to survive. When emotion no longer leads the way, action either disappears or becomes instinct. Mornings passed that he could no longer distinguish from one another. He only remembered that he had gotten up, who had stepped down, had placed his foot where it belonged. Not because he wanted to, but because there was no longer a reason not to, and within that colorless repetition, something quietly took shape. Not motivation, not resolve, but a new rhythm of life, where silence was no longer a refuge for delay, but the ground on which discipline could stand. The monotony was broken on an unannounced day. Not by a great decision, but by small things beginning to drift off their familiar path. One morning, rain poured down heavily. Wind lashed against the window hard enough to wake him before the alarm. The room was darker than usual. The step outside the door seemed to recede, sinking deeper into the curtain of rain. He stood there, not yet wearing his jacket. Cold clung to his skin. His feet touched the floor, then stopped. There was no intention of returning to bed, but there was no urge to move forward either. He stood still, between rain and silence, allowing his body to decide whether it was still willing to continue. In the days that followed, things did not become easier. Work stretched longer. Daily rhythms were thrown off balance. Each morning, his body responded more slowly. Sometimes he stepped down with a heavy rhythm. Sometimes, the moment his foot touched the ground, it wanted to stop. Not because he had grown weaker, but because his limits were beginning to reveal themselves. One evening, as the wind rose more violently, he stood on the porch longer than usual. Rain struck his shoulders. Breath grew heavy. His field of vision narrowed to only a few meters ahead. He did not speed up. He did not try to push through. He held the rhythm he already had. In that moment, something became clear. The storm does not come to be defeated. It comes to test what still stands when all favorable conditions disappear. He continued placing his steps onto the slick, wet ground, not looking far ahead, only far enough to avoid slipping. There was no longer a concept of progress, only complete presence in each small movement. When he stepped back inside, clothes soaked through, he stood still for a few seconds longer, not gasping for breath, not stopping too long, just long enough to feel that he was still there after the wind, after the rain. From that day on, he understood. Difficulty does not arrive to block the path. It arrives to force each step to be placed more precisely. And in the heart of the storm, silence did not disappear. It grew thicker, dense enough to keep him standing firm on each step that followed. Not every challenge takes the shape of a storm. There are days when everything becomes so easy it feels suspicious. One morning he woke without an alarm. His body felt lighter, his breathing steady. The step outside his room no longer made him pause as long as before. That was when temptation appeared, not as a clear invitation, just a passing thought. Today could be a little different. Different in rhythm, different in timing, different in allowing himself to loosen his grip. He stood on the step longer than usual, not because he was tired, but because his mind began sketching shortcuts, steps that felt lighter, faster, less demanding. No one stopped him, no one was watching. The choice unfolded entirely in silence. For a very brief moment, he could have stepped in another direction without leaving a trace. No immediate consequence, no visible failure, but he did not change course. He placed his foot down in the same familiar spot, not because he feared losing progress, but because he realized this: if a principle breaks when there is no pressure, then that principle never truly existed. In the mornings that followed, ease continued to return, and each time he faced the same choice. Not harsh, not loud, just repeating itself. Unbreakable resolve is not formed while resisting hardship. It is formed by refusing very small compromises, the compromises no one else ever sees. He did not feel proud of this. He did not call it a victory. It was simply continuation. And in those calm, uneventful days, he realized he no longer needed to force himself. Silence was no longer a space for wavering. It became a space where decisions were held steady in every step, no matter how light, no longer strayed from the staircase he had chosen. There is no moment you can point to and say, everything changed from here. Transformation does not arrive with applause. It arrives when there is no one left to clap. One morning, he stepped down the staircase without realizing how many times he had done it before. No counting, no remembering. His body simply knew where to go. His foot touched the ground more lightly, not because he tried, but because nothing was blocking the movement anymore. Others began to sense the difference, though they couldn't name it. He didn't speak more. He didn't appear stricter. Yet when standing beside him, complaints often faded halfway through. In silence, he was more fully present, not rushing to react, not needing to prove anything, just standing there, as if he had grown accustomed to not abandoning his place. Discipline was no longer something to be maintained. It was no longer a decision repeated each day. It became obvious, like placing your feet on the floor when you wake up. There were mornings when he stood on the staircase, watching the first light spill into the room, not thinking about yesterday, not preparing for tomorrow, simply realizing that returning to his old self was no longer possible. The quiet radiance of discipline is not about being seen. It lies here. When no one is watching, he still steps forward, and from that point on, each step no longer required effort to stay aligned. It moved in the right direction because there was no other path left inside him. The final test did not come while he was still preparing. It came on a morning that seemed exactly like every other morning. The alarm didn't ring, not because it was broken, but because the night before, he had forgotten to set it. He opened his eyes later than usual. Light had already poured through the curtains. The room no longer held the dense silence of early dawn. For a very brief moment, an old door opened. No one would blame him. No one would know. There was no reason to maintain the familiar rhythm. He sat on the bed, didn't rush to stand, didn't lie back down, just stayed there, between two choices. This was not a moment of physical exhaustion, nor was it a time of harsh circumstances. This was the most dangerous moment, when everything feels good enough to allow you to break yourself. He stepped toward the staircase. There was no heaviness now, no familiar tension, only a question hanging in his mind, not demanding an answer. If he didn't step down today, would tomorrow be any different? He stood still, let it move forward, didn't retreat, didn't look for reasons. Time slowed more than usual, and in the silence he saw clearly what was happening. Not a missed routine, but a small crack that could spread very quickly. He placed his foot down, not because he feared losing what he had built, but because he understood this: if discipline still needs favorable conditions, then it was never discipline to begin with. That day unfolded against expectation. Work piled up. A major decision had to be made quickly. There was no time for long deliberation. In the meeting room, eyes turned toward him. No one spoke first. No one led the way. He paused for one more beat. Didn't search for certainty. Didn't avoid the moment. Then he spoke slowly, clearly, without excess. After the meeting, there was no sense of relief, only a quiet confirmation. When the real moment arrived, he did not disappear. And then a question emerged. Not for him, But for the one listening to this story, if every reason disappears tomorrow morning, where will you place your first step? Asterisk, the transformation did not turn him into a different person in the way people usually imagine. He didn't speak more. He didn't move faster. He didn't appear sharper than anyone else, but one thing had disappeared forever: hesitation at the staircase. One morning, he realized he had stood up without the familiar gap between waking and acting. No time to negotiate. No question to answer. The step happened like a natural reflex. Not decided, not weighed, simply executed. The people around him sensed it before he ever named it himself. In meetings, he didn't rush to insert himself. But when it mattered, his words didn't drift from the center. At home, he was more fully present. Not because he tried harder to care, but because he was no longer pulled away by silent arguments in his own mind. The silence around him was no longer heavy. It had weight, a weight that caused others to slow down when they stood near him. Some mornings, he stood on the staircase and looked back at the distance he had traveled. He didn't count days. He didn't search for proof of change. He recognized one simple truth: he no longer had the capacity to betray the rhythm of life he had chosen. The man he once was needed motivation to begin. The man he is now needs only a morning to continue. Not because he is stronger, but because he has removed everything that once made him stop. And that is the most complete transformation of all. No distance between intention and action. No gap left for retreat. Only footsteps following one another, placed firmly on each step, in a silence that no longer needs explanation. Asterisk, perhaps you've believed that discipline is something you have to strain for every day, forcing yourself forward while part of you still wants to turn back. But what if discipline is simply the act of removing the option to retreat? Every morning, the same staircase is waiting for you. Not higher than yesterday, not easier than tomorrow. Just there in silence, waiting for the first step. No one is watching, no one is recording it. And precisely because of that, the choice carries weight. How long will you stand still before that staircase when there is no reward? When there is no motivation? When there is only silence in yourself? Change doesn't begin by doing more. It begins by no longer allowing yourself not to act. Not a perfect day, just one step that isn't pulled back on the next morning. If this story makes you slow down by a single beat today, hold on to that silence. And if you want to keep walking this path, like, share, and subscribe to the channel so that your mornings no longer pass by unconsciously.